Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. You know, Billy, today our topics, I think we're going to really be a hoot.
Yes, they will, Renee.
Don't think lesser of me for saying that.
Oh, look at you. All right, folks. So you may not realize it, but she just dropped a couple of funny ones there, right? We are going to be talking about owls today, right? So let's give a hoot about that. We got Anna Weicker in here. You know, we love having Anna. She helps out with the Master Naturalist program here in Kentucky, working really closely with Dr. Ellen Crocker and Laura Thomas. And you know, she's a naturalist by training, so she's got just such a wide skill set. You know, she
does.
She knows so much about so much. But
you want to do a show? She's like, sure, here's the topics.
I know. Oh, we love Anna. But today she's going to be talking about owling ID, right? So we do have some different owls out there. So Anna's going to kind of help us sort through the different owls that we have. And then we do have also Dr. Ellen Crocker with us, another issue of her pesky plants, if you will. And we can save that for a little later, right? And I won't reveal your joke on that one. So
lesser
joke.
We'll
have to hang around to kind of get that joke. So no, we're glad to have you all with us. If you all have questions for either of our presenters or Renee or myself, please use the chat function. And if you're on YouTube or you're a podcast listener, hit us up via email at forestry.extension@uky.edu and we can respond that way. But really excited about today's show. Glad to be with you, Renee, even though it's a little chillier here in Lexington than we may want. It's just part of the way it is.
It is. So let's go ahead and get started. So Anna, if you want to turn on your camera. Welcome back. We appreciate you being on.
Hello. I'm so excited. I always love popping in on From the Woods Today to, talk about some random thing that I'm interested in right now, or listen to some things that other folks are talking about. It's always a great time.
Well,
and
you help make it a great time,
so.
Anna. So thank you for all your.
And I mean, you hear owls a lot, but you may not necessarily know what you're hearing. You may just think, well, it's just one owl, and it may be several. So
yes,
I really appreciate you.
Yes, we're here to sort out the owls. And this is kind of a wintry topic. Owls are more active during the winter-ish than they are during other times of year, or they're more easy to hear or spot. So we kind of brought back the wintry weather for today in honor of our owl topic. So hopefully it doesn't stick around for too long because we're that's my excuse for the cold today is we're talking owls, we're talking winter, and here we've got the weather for it. So
yeah, no doubt.
There you go.
We love our seasons in Kentucky, even if you get them all in a week.
All 32 of our seasons. We love
in 1 week.
Yes. All 20 we've had today.
Yeah.
Right.
So I can go ahead and share my screen.
I'm looking forward to this presentation.
Yes, if you all are ready to go. And of course, as always, I never mind if anyone, needs to pop in and ask a question or something like that. But also, if you see any tech glitches along the journey today,
we'll let you know. We'll
hop on here and let me know, and we'll do our best to get those figured out. All right, so what are we talking about today? Well, you probably guessed from the amazing puns that we're talking about owls, and we're talking specifically about finding owls. So if you are interested in encountering these weird birds in the wild, here are some tips and tricks and identification knowledge to kind of facilitate that encounter, hopefully. So a real quick introduction. My name is Anna Weicker, and I'm the Kentucky Master Naturalist Outreach Coordinator. So I assist with the Kentucky Master Naturalist program for volunteer training program across the state of Kentucky. We currently have a cohort going on, but we try to have a cohort, every year or so. So if it's something that you're interested in, I'm happy to chat about it afterwards. Shoot me an email. I'll put my email up on the screen. I would love to add you to the list to be notified when our next training opens. But back to the owl. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about when, and I already mentioned that winter is a great time to get out and about and start getting familiar with your local owl species. Their breeding season is earlier in the year than most of the other birds. You know, when we think about when are the birds nesting, it's spring. Owls generally start their breeding season much earlier. You know, think really a lot of, depending on the species, but a lot of them are really starting to establish territories in December, potentially even sitting on eggs by January, February, this time of year. So these guys are getting started early, and that means that they are more active during the winter time when a lot of other birds are not active yet, conducting breeding activities. Where can you go to see some owls? Well, there's lots of different options, and we're going to talk about the best places in terms of habitat, but we're also going to talk about the best places in terms of you not being cited for trespassing. We're going to talk about who are the usual suspects. So what are the most common owl species you're going to be encountering no matter where you are in Kentucky? And then the how of it all. So if you are wanting to go out owling, what are the best ways to do that? What are some things to look for? What are some things that can help you kind of in your owl knowledge journey? And how can you make sure that you are actively looking out for the welfare of the birds that you're out there looking for? Um, because of course, as nature enthusiasts, the last thing that we want to do is compromise, you know, the safety of the wildlife that we're out there in search of, right? So when, again, the breeding season for owls falls earlier than other birds, so we're right in the thick of it now. It really depends on species and, you know, your location in the country and a few other factors. But December and January are when you will see a lot of public owl prowls held. The owls are establishing territory, attracting mates, you know, very much active and easy to hear and possibly even see. And then into February and March. So this time of year, you know, they may be sitting on nests. They may still be actively calling at night. I'm still hearing them calling at night where I'm located in central Kentucky. So this is the time of year both to get out there, but also to prep yourself for next year as well. So where to go look for owls? Well, the three species we're going to focus on today um, are woodland owls. And by woodland owls, I mean, for the most part, they really like there to be some trees. They're not too picky otherwise. One of the species is maybe a little bit more of a specialist, and we'll get into that. But for the most part, it doesn't need to be in the middle of nowhere for you to go out and about and be looking for these owls, right? If you have an urban park nearby, if you live in a city with a lot of tree canopy, these are owls that you could very well encounter if you live in town or if you live in a rural area and you're lucky enough to have, you know, woods on your property, or, you know, access to woods. These are owls that are very likely to already be um, in your neck of the woods, so to speak. And that, again, that spans from urban to rural. And there's, you know, we always think of owls as nocturnal, and that is true. They are most active during the night. Um, that's the best time to go look for them, but they can be encountered during the day. And we're going to talk about the ways to sort of facilitate those encounters. Um, and sometimes it just happens by accident. You know, sometimes the universe just gifts you with an owl that you didn't expect in the middle of the day. But generally speaking, nighttime is best to go actively search for owls. If you have access to your own or other private property with permission, that is, of course, awesome. You can, you know, sort of have the freedom to roam around your own property, your own farm, your own woodlot with, you know, sort of a degree of freedom that you might not have in other places. Or if you know somebody with private property who doesn't mind you taking a night hike out there, then that is also amazing, obviously. Um, if not, look at the public lands around you and research, contact folks, questions, you know, make sure that you're a-okay to be accessing those areas at night, and that you're not going out there during an unsafe time. Be sure that you are aware of local hunting seasons, that kind of thing. Some public lands and parks do not allow you to be out there overnight, so be aware of that. Just be sure that you're doing your research. I think this is a lovely excuse to go camping. There's no better time to hear owls than when you're camping and you're trying to sleep and the owls show up right above your tent. It's almost the most surefire way to go owling is to be camping somewhere in the woods and be trying to sleep. Or if you don't feel comfortable or you feel like you don't have good access to public land, you can look into attending an organized owl prowl at a local park or public land near you. These are becoming increasingly popular. Generally, it'll look like a group, uh, led hike out into the woods where you have a leader who, can sort of help you identify the different species of owls, can help you know what you're listening to. And it's great to be in that group environment and have some leadership if it's something that, you're not kind of comfortable with doing on your own, because certainly going out in the woods at night can be a little bit intimidating if it's not something that you regularly do. So what about all these owls? What are all these owls doing? Well, let's sort them out. We have a handful of species, 8 to be precise, that occur in the state of Kentucky. They're listed up on the screen there. And for the most part, these are not owls that you are going to commonly encounter. So really, we're going to focus on the 3 commonest species across the entire state today and, sort of be aware that these other ones may be encountered, may show up. Um, just, great always to have extra knowledge, but not something that I would expect to encounter in most owling situations. So out of these 8 owl species that I listed, the barred owl, the eastern screech owl, and the great horned owl are the most common, widespread ones. They tend to, um, I don't want to say not be migratory, but they tend to like be year-round present in most areas of Kentucky. You can see them all nesting in Kentucky. They're owls that, no matter what county you're in, you might see anywhere from, your urban park to a farm. So these are the usual suspects, but there certainly are other ones out there. I do want to touch briefly on something that you might see regarding owls in the news every little while. And you might remember it from a couple years back too. We had a larger owl eruption. And an eruption is, in the context of, biology, is a, a population fluctuation that kind of occurs on a cyclic basis, right? So some years that you'll have an eruption and some years you won't. And for our owl species, it really depends on prey availability in their natural range. So these species that are known for this like eruption pattern are species that are northern. So you can see on this top map here, that is the normal range for the snowy owl, one of the most well-known examples of owls that experience population eruptions. They're normally found in Canada. They're a far northern owl. They're eating, snowshoe hares, lemmings, whatever it might be up there in the tundra. And then when the populations of their prey items crash or boom, that affects the snowy owl's population. And they will oftentimes start hopping lower into the, lower 48, and they'll randomly be seen some years in states where they would never normally show up. So they've shown up, snowy owls have shown up in Kentucky before. Um, there's, some other species like rough-legged hawks, northern saw-whet owls. There are some other species of birds of prey and owls that experience something like this, where it's like one year you might hear all about it on the news. You might see lots of sightings of snowy owls or northern saw-whet owls, some of these other species. But in general, these are not species that you would commonly see in Kentucky. So let's move back to our big 3 of the day. The first one that I want to chat about is the great horned owl. This is our largest owl. They are just a great big, intimidating apex predator, up to around 2 feet tall with up to a 5-foot wingspan. And when I think of great horned owls, I really think that they're like the classic owl species, right? These are like the Halloween prop owl. These are the owls that you see in movies. These are, just they have the ear tufts. They have these great big yellow eyes. They're very intimidating. They look like everything that you kind of think that an owl should be. very much, sort of the classic owl. There's some color variation across the range and across individuals. Nothing too significant. Most of them are this kind of mottled combination of gray and brown and white with some bars across the chest. And again, they have those distinctive ear tufts, and those are going to go like up or down, like they're just feathers. They're feather tufts. They're not actually real ears, and they'll kind of go up and down with the owl's mood and expression, so to speak. So it might look differently depending on what's going on with the owl. But generally speaking, with great horned owls, you're going to see that profile with the big ear tufts sticking up. So you can see, I wanted to include some pictures on the slideshow of like your typical owl sighting. Generally owls are nocturnal. They're afraid of people. They're not necessarily going to be easy to spot. And so I think it's, unrealistic to kind of uh, hope that you'll get that National Geographic image of an owl in your backyard. It could happen, but more likely you're going to see an owl like this. He's farther away, he's silhouetted, but you can still see this is a big, chunky owl, and he's got those ear tufts sticking up too. So the vocalization for great horned owls is, I think, also it's like the owl vocalization. It's the one that you hear like dubbed into a lot of movies if they're trying to make it sound spooky in a scene or something like that. It's a low series of hoots, and a lot of the times you'll hear uh, a pair duetting back and forth or that kind of thing. So I'll go ahead and just play the vocalization, typical vocalization for these guys, and bear in mind that this is two calling back and forth, so you're going to hear double the owls, two owls for the price of one. I'm just kidding. I think that's only one owl. It might be two owls. And then aside from the hoots, you're going to also hear, especially if you're lucky enough to be in proximity to a nest or younger owls, just a variety of super weird screams that the fledglings make when they want things from their parents. Not unlike human children. So some mad little squawks, some mad little screams. Fledgling owls of all species make a lot of, kind of weird, different noises. So do certainly be aware of that. Next up, we have my favorite of the big three. I do have a bias, and it is the barred owl. So the barred owl is a pretty good sized owl, but it does not measure up to the great horned owl, and in fact is sometimes a prey species for the great horned owl. So great horned owls are, a true apex predator in their ecosystems. Barred owls are going to be going for smaller prey, but they're still a good sized owl, about 1.5 feet tall with a wingspan of about 3.5 feet. And what to me is really distinctive about these guys is they have these great big giant dark soulful eyes. Like they don't have the typical like yellow owl eye. They have these big, dark eyes with a rounded head that has no ear tufts. And so they look very different from the other owls that we're going to talk about. They have that rounded profile. They have those big dark eyes like centered right in the middle of their facial disc. And they're just very unique looking, even in profile. And these owls, we touched a little bit on how, many of our owls are comfortable living in more suburban or urban areas. I would say that my experience with these owls has been that they do exhibit a preference to be a little bit further away from that type of environment. They like lowland woods. They love to be, next to a river, next to a swamp with some big old trees. They prefer to be out a little ways. Not to say you can't encounter them in town, but generally speaking, I would expect to get a little more hiking in if you're interested in looking for barred owls. And you should be interested in looking for barred owls because they are the most hilarious owl that we have, in my opinion. They are a really vocal owl, and they're very talky back and forth to each other, and they have a wide range of vocalizations. The most famous vocalization for these guys, sort of the typical song, as it were, is a series of hoots that has a distinctive rhythm. The rhythm in Kentucky is "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" Um, and I guess in Canada maybe they say something different. But our here in Kentucky, our southern owls say "Who cooks for you all?" So listen for that distinctive rhythm. I'll go ahead and play the barred owl hoot, and it's very, very unique in terms of owl vocalizations in Kentucky. So in addition to that, like, series of hoots, which is, what you want to kind of train your ear for if you're looking for them, they also make every other sound under the sun. And not just the fledglings, but the adults will do, a wide range of kind of cackling and laughing and hooting and squawking back and forth. And it can sound very interesting, and it can be very loud if you have, two owls that are kind of talking back and forth, in the proximity. Um, they, I don't, this is not supported by science, but anecdotally, these owls do love to locate themselves above a campsite, and do this all night long while you're trying to sleep. So that could be a great way to hear these again, if you want to hear some barred owls. So these are two barred owls calling back and forth, um, doing all their weird little sounds. So just a weird sounding owl, right? Just extra strange. And I love them. I think they're so cool. The last one that we are going to touch on, out of those common three, is the Eastern Screech Owl. This is our little guy. This owl is regularly, kind of hand-sized, about 6.5 inches long to 9.5 inches long, with a wingspan of really maxing out at 2 feet, and that would be a big screech owl. It occurs in two color phases. With some, kind of middle ground in between the color phases, depending on where you are in the country, but you can see them. You can see on the upper one here, is more reddish, and then the lower one that's coming out of the nest box is gray, the gray phase Eastern screech owl. And this is not associated with the sex of the owl. We're pretty familiar with some bird species that are, different plumage indicates a different sex or a different life phase, maybe a juvenile versus adult. But with these guys, it doesn't have anything to do, necessarily with the anything other than it just happens to be that color phase, with some geographic variation. They do have ear tufts. You can see on this little red face one that's sleeping. He's got real pointy ear tufts sticking up. And then, they're less visible on the sky that's coming out of the nest box. Just like the great horned owl, these are just feather tufts and they're sticking up, and can be, put down as well, depending on the owl's mood and, sort of where it's sitting and what's going on around it. But generally expect to see, if you see the sound profile, expect to see ear tufts. They have big yellow eyes, just like the great horned owl. Um, and these are a pretty people-friendly little owl. What I mean by a good backyard owl is these are ones where you might be able to Depending on what type of yard you have or what type of property you have, you may be able to put up one or more eastern screech owl nest boxes and attract these guys to be, your literal neighbors, which is so cool. And if that's something that you're interested in, I'm happy to pop some um, recommendations for owl nest boxes in the comments or talk about it after we wrap up this presentation. How cool is it to have an owl in your backyard? Extremely cool. So I can't recommend it enough. That's the easiest owl prowling there is providing a nesting site for these guys and letting them actually nest on your property. They have two different calls that are commonly heard. And just like our great horned owl, you're going to have, your fledglings are going to be like screaming and carrying on and making all sorts of weird noises. And sometimes even the adults too. But in general, there are two common like songs that you'll hear from the Eastern screech owl. This first one is often known as the whinny call. And it's a trill that starts on one pitch and descends. And I always think it sounds like a tiny horse. And then the tremolo call is a trill, but it stays on one pitch basically the entire time. So it doesn't have that descending uh, call, descent in pitch like the whinny call. Um, and for this video, you can actually hear both of those. This owl is doing both of those calls and kind of interchanging with each other. So first of all, you can hear how he's using both of those calls um, interchangeably, sort of going back and forth between them. Second of all, you can see that this owl is calling during the day or at least in the evening while it's still light. That is certainly sometimes something that you encounter, especially, you've got a cloudy day, it's getting on towards evening. Don't, you know, sleep on just stepping outside on your porch and taking a little listen to see if your neighborhood owls might be, kind of active in those daylight, low light conditions. Third of all, I do have to point out, scientifically speaking, isn't he just like the cutest thing you ever saw? One of my favorite things about the Eastern screech owl is if you see one calling in real life, they're putting 110% into it. And it's so cute, scientifically speaking. Okay, so those are our three owls that you are most likely to encounter. Again, there's lots more, and we're going to get into identification aids in case you encounter one of those ones in the field and you're like, oh, this was not one of the ones that we talked about. We'll get into that in a minute, but expect that if you encounter an owl in Kentucky, in most situations, it will be a great horned owl, a barred owl, or an eastern screech owl. Now, you're wanting to see some owls. How are you going to do that? Well, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks, but it is difficult. These are species that have certainly evolved to be active during a time period when most of us are not. They're very sneaky. They are very well camouflaged, but that does not mean that you're not going to be able to see them or hear them. So first up, roosting owls. If owls are active at night, that means they're usually sleeping during the day. So a lot of the times, especially with this species we mentioned, that may be in an evergreen or another secluded area, depending on the species, maybe even a building, a barn, an overhang, something like that. I've heard stories of people bringing their Christmas tree in and finding, a little eastern screech owl sleeping in it. So they love, kind of a more secluded tree like that. If you are walking through the woods and you're looking down on the ground, you want to look for owl pellets, which are the regurgitated remains of their prey. It just, looks like a ball of fur, or scat, sometimes called whitewash with owls. Um, you can also look for songbirds that are exhibiting mobbing behavior. And mobbing behavior is when you have songbirds, and that could be anything from American crows down to, chickadees and little birds, will locate a predator, generally, like a hawk, an owl, a snake, something like that, in the vicinity, and they will basically uh, follow it around and vocalize loudly, harass it, sort of all in a group. They'll kind of gang up on it, as it were. And the purpose behind that is really, for most predators, their effectiveness as a predator depends on their ability to sneak up on prey, right? But you can't sneak up on prey if you have 15 other little birds following you around and screaming everywhere you go. So a lot of the times you'll see that with owl crows. Crows will do that to hawks a lot, hawks and owls. Blue jays, chickadees, titmice, they'll, be acting, in a group, obviously upset about something, and that can be a good indicator that they have discovered a roosting owl, and they're making sure that that owl does not get a good day's sleep. So keep an ear out and an eye out for that, certainly. Um, This is an example of an owl roost from sort of the ground level. You can see their scat or whitewash on those evergreens down there. And that could indicate that above it is a regularly used owl roost, or possibly even an owl nest. I do want to mention briefly that we're going to close out our presentation today talking about the ethics of interacting with owls. So, just bear in mind that I am going to follow up all of this information about finding owls with some tips to keep the owls safe. Don't forget that your most likely way to encounter an owl is by hearing one. They're very vocal and they're active at night, so you can't really see them very well necessarily. So, be familiar with the owl vocalizations from those species you would expect to see, but don't forget that they're not the only thing that's out there, right? We have lots of other wildlife, raccoons, foxes, coyotes, that you can hear at night that make a variety of sounds that could be mistaken for an owl. Raccoons in particular make a sound that I think sounds very similar to an eastern screech owl. So spend some time, finding some recordings, getting familiar with some of the other critters that you might hear while you're out in the woods at night as well. And don't forget, if you're anywhere near humans, nothing sounds like an owl more than the neighbor's dog barking when you really, really, really want it to be an owl, and your brain is just like, it's an owl, but your heart knows that it's the neighbor's dog. So be aware that owls are not the only thing you might hear. And certainly that can be kind of exciting, right? It's, you know, we're in it because we love wildlife and animals, and we love to go out and explore the woods. And there's nothing wrong with being able to hear some mammals while you're out there, as well as owls. So just keep that in mind when you're out there at night. So if you're heading out on your own private property, someone else's private property that you got permission from, a public space that allows you to be out there at night, don't forget to put in some prep work ahead of time for your nighttime owling excursions. It's always good to have a safety plan. It's never a good idea to head out somewhere at night where you've never been during the day when you can see. So have a plan, let people know where you're at, take people with you. Be sure that you have a light source. I like headlamps because they let your hands free. And a lot of the times they'll have like a red light setting, which is less disruptive during the night to your night vision and less disruptive to the owls that you might encounter. So a headlamp with a red light setting is awesome. Layers, it is colder at night and it's easy to forget that. And it's also really cold when you're just standing there, not moving, listening for owls. So if you think it's chilly outside, it's going to be extra chillier than that. So be sure that you are equipped for the weather. And then I recommend that you, of course, have your phone charged for safety, and have somebody who knows where you are and when to expect you back, but also have it charged because you want to download the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's free Merlin app. This is a fantastic app that is going to help you identify not just those common three species that we talked about, but also those other species of owls that occur in Kentucky if you are lucky enough to encounter them. So just a couple screen grabs from the Merlin app's entry on the great horned owl. Each entry is going to have lots of different examples of songs, lots of different examples of, sounds, lots of images. And then it also has the ability to record audio in the field and identify birds that the app records in that audio. So you can see on this last screen grab there, this is what it looks like. I was having Merlin listen for birds and it heard a great horned owl. You can see the visual representation of that on the recording there. And then it lit up with great horned owl because it identified it as a great horned owl. Now, owls in particular seem to be a little bit confusing for this algorithm, this AI. Um, Definitely, it's not a substitute for learning and being familiar with things on your own, but it is such a helpful aid to point you in the right direction if you don't feel, comfortable and confident about an ID on your own, or if you're just looking to make a recording. So maybe you can check with, another human that you know who's knowledgeable about it, and they can kind of double check Merlin and make sure that it's okay. So an absolutely lovely aid, a great way to help you identify those owls that are a little less common should you encounter them. But do be sure that you are familiarizing yourself and your human brain with these owls and these vocalizations without just relying on an app. But also download the app because it's free and amazing. So let's end with possibly the most important part of this presentation, and that is the ethics side of things, right? Owls are very cool. Humans love owls. We've loved owls for centuries across civilizations. We've been intrigued by them, and us modern humans are no different. And you want to be sure when you are out searching for owls, if you are fortunate enough to find one, that you're doing the absolute most to protect that owl's uh, location, health, and sanity, and also, ensuring that you're not potentially causing more stress to the environment in your quest to actually enjoy it. So I adapted some of this from like a longer version that the American Birding Association has put out. And that organization just put it out as a great guideline for ethically and responsibly interacting with owls in particular. So this shortened version, we'll just go through it real quick, and then I'm happy to share the long version with anybody who is interested. So number one ethical recommendation from the American Birding Association is educate others about the value of owls. If you're wandering around at night with a headlamp and an app on your phone, you might look a little bit strange and you might get some questions. And that is okay because it's a great opportunity to talk to other people about owls. Owls are not, they're very misunderstood. There's a lot of misinformation about them out there, and everybody loves and appreciates them. And it's a great opportunity to hook people on wildlife and birds and get people thinking about, the importance of conservation in their communities and their neighborhoods if you can corner them and talk about owls. Um, number one, number two, supposed to be number two. Take care not to flush owls from their roosts or nests. So we talked about finding roosts. That is a very sensitive time for an owl. Certainly, it is an extra sensitive time for an owl if they are on a nest incubating eggs or taking care of young. You do not want to get close enough to cause any stress to the owl. And if you notice that an owl is stressed by your presence, then you definitely want to be sure that you're, increasing that distance or leaving the vicinity until, that owl has relaxed. When they are flushed off their roost during the day, that can be really stressful for them. It can use unnecessary calories. It can alert, you know, your local crows to the presence of the owl, so he will not be able to sleep the rest of the day. And uh, you know, it's burning calories, it's stress on the owl. Um, and even more so with nests, if they're taking care of babies, you don't want to stress them out. And different owls may have a different tolerance level for human interaction. So the American Birding Association pointed this out really well in one of their posts about owling ethics, that you might have, an urban park with an owl nesting in it that's very used to people jogging by with their dogs. And that owl is going to have a different tolerance level for humans than an owl that is, way out in the country that sees people 2 times a year. So kind of be thinking about that in the back of your head when you're interacting with owls if you find a nest or a roost in particular. Um, and these are all number one. PowerPoint did some re-numbering for me. So number 3 is limit calling for owls, especially during the nesting season, and avoid calling for them unless you're part of an organized owl survey. You might have noticed I didn't touch on this a ton, but if you've ever been on an owl prowl, then you have potentially heard the group leader use the recording for an owl to attract owls or provoke a territorial response. So they call and you can hear them, right? Which is fine, for the most part, like that group leader is hopefully, educated and has an awareness of the stress level that the owls in their park are able to tolerate. Um, but if it's in an area where people are repeatedly showing up and doing it day after day after day, that owl can become very rapidly stressed out from defending itself against an imaginary intruder every single day, nonstop. So it can be very stressful, especially during the nesting season. The owl is taking that time to defend its territory against a tape recorder, when it should be sitting on eggs or feeding nestlings. So in general, avoid it. But you will see it done sometimes, in an organized setting. And generally that group leaders, kind of got an idea of um, how they want to handle that situation. So to wrap it up, number 4, use discretion about disclosing the site of owl roosts and nests. Not everybody is going to be as responsible as you are. People get excited and that's okay, but just be discreet about who you tell people, what you tell people. And then if someone else shares an owl's location with you, don't assume that it's, blanket permission to tell other people. Do check in with them and make sure, that that's okay. And then last of all, or second to last of all, if you find an owl's nest, generally speaking, you want to leave them alone, give them some space. And then for real last of all, report the location of roosts or nests of rare, threatened, or endangered species to the appropriate government authority. In Kentucky, that is the barn owl. The barn owl is, a rare and unusual owl to find nesting in Kentucky, and the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife are very interested in knowing about the locations. So if you are lucky enough to know of a barn owl nest, then be sure that you let those folks um, know about it. So having said all of that, I think I went over my owling time by about 5 minutes. I owl prowled a little too hard. But I hang out the rest of the time, chat and answer questions right now or in the chat or you know, we can follow up at the end, whatever you would prefer.
You actually have several questions, and we might not be able to get to all of them, but maybe we can do that after once we, end the show. One of the first one was, why do crows chase owls? Do you know that answer?
Yeah, we
I'm
uh we talked
curious.
about it. Yeah, we talked about it briefly, but basically crows are really effective mobbing birds, and that mobbing behavior is basically just where you have a gang of songbirds kind of uh all together harassing and vocalizing around a predator to ensure that that predator is not able to, sneak up on any prey or be a threat to anybody, really. It's tons of different species of birds will do it. It's a great way to locate an owl in an area, but American crows are really infamous because, for one, they're not scared of anything, and so they don't care. They will get right in a great horned owl's face and be sassy.
I've seen them run hawks off too.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
We
they're
had
just like,
you
okay,
know, I
Right.
got you. Yeah.
we can fight.
Yeah, let's throw down. Oh, and I loved your presentation. It was
It
so
was
good. It
awesome.
really was. Yeah, and I think all of our audience did as well. Really appreciate
Yeah.
that. And hopefully we get a chance to get to the rest of these questions here. So if everybody can kind of hang out for that. But
Yeah, just hang out
Yeah.
after the show and we'll get Anna to answer a lot of these questions. But
yeah,
for now, we need to get to Dr. Crocker.
yeah,
But Anna, thank you so
yeah,
much. And we will get right back with you after Dr.
For
Crocker's.
sure. I will
yeah.
hang out. I'm excited to hear the puns for our next
Exactly.
presentation.
Well, we
Exactly.
haven't revealed what the
We haven't
pesky
revealed
plan
it
is.
yet.
Well, I'm
Although,
excited.
yeah, yeah,
All
remember
right.
in it. So,
Yeah. So,
okay.
Dr.
Dr.
Crocker, if you want
Crocker.
to turn your camera on and tell everybody the
Hello.
pun, because everybody's wondering.
No, the
Oh my goodness.
anticipation is building.
Yeah. So I said I would hope Billy wouldn't think lesser of me.
And today we're talking about lesser
There
celandine.
you go.
So there you
Yeah,
go.
good
Bum
stuff.
bum.
Love it.
Well,
All right. So, Dr. Crocker, if you want to go ahead and start sharing your presentation, that'd be
great.
great.
And I enjoyed hearing all about owls. So great presentation from Anna there. So this week we are going to be talking about an invasive plant, a pesky plant that we don't want to be seeing in your woods, lesser celandine. It's also called fig buttercup, and as you can see from this picture, it is in the buttercup family. So it's got these shiny, waxy yellow flowers. But while it might look pretty, in addition to being toxic to people and toxic to wildlife, this buttercup can be big problems in your woods and other natural areas. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about lesser celandine or fig buttercup, whatever you want to call it, and what it's doing and what you can do about it. So the reason that lesser celandine is a problem is that it will rapidly take over and form dense mats that can cover the ground and exclude other species. It's actually a spring ephemeral, which this time of year I tend to think of as a good thing. I'm looking forward to seeing those spring wildflowers, but in this case, it means that it's going to pop up in the spring very early and then go dormant for the rest of the year, dying back. It's originally from Europe and parts of Africa and Asia, and it was brought to the United States as an ornamental plant. The first documented reports of it were in the 70s. So since then, it has spread and is a growing problem in our region. So not only is this competing with the spring ephemerals that you want to see in your woods, but since the soil is exposed when this dies back at other times of year, you've got the potential for increased erosion. The first place you might see lesser celandine is moving in along the sides of streams and rivers and creeks. Like in this picture here, you can see the invasion along the side of this stream. And imagine that not only was that stream at a pretty high risk for erosion to begin with, but it's especially going to be once all of this dies back and you just have a lot of exposed soil. So this is a wet forested area next to a stream where lesser celandine has totally taken over. And you can imagine that when this blooms, it's really pretty, and people might want to take their photos next to this mat of yellow, but it doesn't last for long, and it can be really hard to manage and deal with. It can also move out from those areas, those wetter areas, into drier, more upland forested locations, as you see here. And it can even be a problem in landscape settings and gardens, like this spot that I saw last spring, where it had totally taken over someone's yard. Unfortunately, because it's a pretty flower that pops up early in the year. I've seen people who planted it in their gardens and then it took over everywhere. So how does this spread? Well, in addition to people moving it around, which certainly is how it got here and some of its spread, it also has features that make it really easy to move around in waterways or accidentally move it around in soil. And it produces lots of tiny bulbs. So these tiny bulbs make it really hard, if not impossible, to pull it up effectively. Because if you're trying to pull it up, those little bulbs just dislodge and will sprout again. In addition, they can be moved around if there's erosion. Moving soil downstream, those bulbs can float downstream. They could even move on your shoes or equipment or hooves if things are walking around in muddy ground. So how do you know to identify lesser celandine? Because there are other things that kind of look the similar that pop up this time of year. It's got dark, shiny green leaves, and they have this heart-shaped appearance. And in addition, they tend to have this dappled or water spotted texture and appearance to the surface of those leaves. On top of that, look for those bright, glossy yellow flowers. They are distinctive and stick out. They are kind of presented on these long stems, which make them even more obvious. But there are other weeds and invasive buttercups that can look similar in the flower form. So just a heads up on that. So when it comes to managing lesser celandine, now that it's on your radar, of course, don't plant it. This might seem obvious, but again, it does look pretty, and we love to have our great flowers in the spring. But if you're tempted by some that you saw out there, instead consider all sorts of other great plants that we've got that might be similar, might have lovely yellow flowers like green and gold here, or even kind of bloom this time of year, like the celandine poppy, which is a different species, not an invasive species, but a native species. Even though they both have celandine in the name, different plants, and the celandine poppy is a lovely native plant that you might enjoy for its lovely yellow flowers, not an invasive problem. Another thing that I would really recommend is to catch it before it spreads. Those pictures where I showed, just a solid mat of lesser celandine, in those cases, it's really hard to eradicate. And it might be more important to limit its spread, prevent it from invading new areas. On the other hand, if you can catch it when it's just a few little patches here or there, you might be able to dig it up, and you want to be sure to get the entire root system. Be careful with those tiny little bulbs. If it's a small patch, you might be able to cover it up with a tarp or mulch it so that it smothers what's underneath. And there are systemic herbicides that can be used. Typically, it's recommended to apply those before flowering, which is kind of tricky because it sticks out the most when it's flowering. It can be a little hard to see before it flowers, but glyphosate is commonly used, and you will want to do several years of spot treating. So finding those small patches of it when you can, and making sure to monitor it year after year, because these are spring ephemerals. They're going to come and go. Your treatment for using that herbicide is really short and limited, and it's in February to April, which is tricky from a weather perspective. Sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not. So it could be limited, and also important to say that it is important to consider where it's growing. If this is going to be in a really wet area, a stream side, you want to make sure that you're using herbicides, if you're choosing to use those, that are going to be appropriate for those settings, that are going to be water safe, and you are reading and following the label so that there's not going to be some unintended consequences of that. Now, if you are dealing with lesser celandine in your lawn, there's a lot of options as well, and different herbicides that might be more appropriate than thinking about those woodland settings where we really want to prevent any damage to the species you want to be keeping. So after this, you want to monitor for new arrivals and resprouts. Here's someone out in the woods with me, scouting for lesser celandine, looking for those leaves, looking for the yellow flowers, just to kind of spot treat those areas and prevent them from reestablishing or coming in again. So here's just a quick success story that I've seen with lesser celandine, because it can be a challenge to think about how could you tackle this. This is at University of Kentucky's Arboretum, and they discovered they had an infestation in kind of their back quarter there. By the time they saw it, you could see it had already spread quite a bit. So using a combination of covering areas up with tarps, the solarizing, and glyphosate and digging up, you can see in a pretty short time period, able to mostly eradicate that lesser celandine, but it's important to stay on top of it, because if you give it a while, it could come back. So it's not something that you're going to deal with 1 year and be totally through with, but it is something that you can have a big positive impact with. So with that, a little bit about lesser celandine, an invasive plant you don't want to be seeing in your woods, and encourage you to get out this spring, look around your woods and see what's coming up. Hopefully you see all sorts of wonderful native plants and wildflowers, but if you see some invasive plants, it's a great time of year to scout for them and manage them. So with that, I'm going to stop my share and see what questions we've got.
So thank you, Ellen. We greatly appreciate that presentation. And someone did ask how big are the leaves?
Oh, they're not very big. Maybe that big or smaller. Kind of, you could look at it, squint at it, and it would look a little bit like a violet leaf, if you know that size. A
Mhm.
little bit smaller than that, and they do vary. You've got some that are bigger leaves and some that are smaller, but not huge.
So they don't get the size of a red bud leaf?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I'm not
They
saying
look
it's
similar
impossible.
with
I
that
just haven't
heart-shaped
seen
pattern.
it.
Yeah.
That would be the biggest lesser celandine I've seen.
Well, we don't want that.
Greater celandine, then, you know.
Greater celandine. No, thank you. In terms of which herbicide to recommend, I have, in the settings that I've worked with glyphosate-containing herbicides, but I encourage you to read the labels, check them out, because every herbicide is different. They all go by different brand names. Glyphosate is the active chemical, but there's a lot of different herbicides that have that, some of which might have other things in them that won't be appropriate for the setting that you're working with, others that'll be a better fit. And you want to make sure that you're following those label directions, so that you can keep yourself safe as an applicator. You can be effective in what you're doing, but also keep that space that you're working in safe and healthy as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, Ellen, to, know your label, because some of those formulations are designed to be used near water and others are not, and if this is an area of plant we might find around wet areas, just be really cognizant of that, if you're using any herbicides.
Yep.
Yeah,
Good
definitely.
stuff.
All
Great.
right.
All right. Well, I'll
Thank
turn
you.
it back over to you, because I know we've got more owl questions to get to.
We have a
But
couple for you too, but we will
Was there
get
some
those answered.
toxicity of that, Ellen?
there
Is
is.
yeah.
So, as with many buttercups, these are things that you don't want to eat. They can cause vomiting, nausea, dizziness, all sorts of negative impacts if consumed.
Wow. Okay.
Be on the lookout and get that thing out of here. Yes.
Yeah.
Might be
Yeah.
pretty, but you don't want to deal with it.
You don't want it. Don't be tempted. Don't be fooled by it.
Yeah.
All
Kind of
right.
lull you in like the Bradford pears does with those pretty white
Exactly.
flowers. Yes.
I know.
All right. Thank you so much,
Oh,
Dr.
good
Clark.
stuff.
Thank
We
Yes.
really
you.
appreciate it.
All right.
All right. Great show.
Very
See?
good show.
Yes, very good show. So we greatly appreciate Dr. Ellen Crocker being on, and also Anna Weicker to talk about owls and lesser celandine.
Yeah, great show. Really appreciate everybody being part of it. They did a great job and had a lot of engagement with our audience. We still got some questions we're going to try to wrap up here in a little while. But thank you all so much for being part of the show. We really do appreciate it.
We do. And remember, if you just like, ooh, I want to hear those owls again, you can go to fromthewoodstoday.com in a couple of days and we will have those posted. And all of our shows are posted there.
Yeah, and if you all ever want to see something, let us know. We have a little link
Please.
there that you can give us a little survey and let us know, what topics you'd like to see.
Definitely. All right. Until then, we will see you all next week. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
From the woods today. From the woods woods today.